Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great webinar from cpaacademy.org. My name is Vaughn Smith. I will be your moderator for today's session on diversity and inclusion one-on-one, living at the intersection. We're so glad you have taken time out of your busy day to spend the next hour with us. We have some great information from wonderful presenters who are up there on their webcams right now. No, that's not me. I'm just the one sitting behind them and making sure everything is working a-okay. And that's the first thing I'd like to do is make sure you can hear my voice, see that title slide, see their webcams, and you can tell me in the questions panel. That's over there on that right-hand side of your interface. Go ahead and click on that. Type in hello. Tell us where you're tuning in from. Love to see that. If you're having any technical difficulties during this webinar, please let me know there in that questions panel, and I will do my best to answer you as quickly as possible. And you can always type in questions for our presenter right there in that questions panel. If we don't have time to answer your questions during the session, we will make sure to send over a full report to Jina afterwards so she can see any items that may have been missed. Okay, let's check in with our audience. We are coming in from Dallas, Texas. We've also got Tampa Bay, Florida. Yes, I'm not too far from you in Gainesville. We've got Chicago. Looks like we've got Atlanta and California. All right, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today. This session qualifies for 1 CPE credit. You need to remain logged in for 50 minutes and answer our polls. We have 4 polls. You only need 3 for credit, but answer them all because it's just fun to answer polls. And you have a handout over there in that handouts panel. And you can also find that in your CPA Academy account. That account is where you'll find your issued CPE credit within about 24 hours and a recording of this presentation. And of course, an evaluation. We always welcome and appreciate your feedback. Okay, I have covered everything I need. So let's bring up our moderator on that side. Jina, it's all yours.
Thank you, Vaughn, and thank you everyone for joining us again. I'm so excited. By the way, Vaughn, I noticed there was somebody from Maryland. There always is, my peeps, but you didn't call them out. So anyway, thank you all for joining us today. I have with us, I realized didn't have the right slide up. Here we are. We have Mark Travis Rivera joining us today. Mark is an award-winning professional storyteller, and I can attest to this firsthand because I saw his session at last year's Amplify DEI conference. It was titled Authenticity, Why It Is Essential to True Belonging, and it really resonated with me. So of course I reached out to Mark. I wanted to get to know him better, and I invited him to join us today. Mark is a graduate of William Patterson University in New Jersey with a bachelor's in women's and gender studies and a minor in public relations. He's received several honors and awards for his work with the LGBTQ community. Most recently, he won the Audre Lorde Award for Social Justice from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, CUNY. He's a dancer, writer, podcaster, speaker, and so I'm excited. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, Jina, thank you so much for having me. I am so thankful to be in community with you, and I'm glad that Vivian's Amplify DEI Summit was able to bring us together. So thank you so much for having me today, and thank you all to everyone who's in attendance.
Thank you, and I just have to say, I want everybody to know, I went through the effort to put on a little bit of makeup today because Mark, your makeup is beautiful. So thank you. No pressure to me. You didn't mean to do that.
Not.
You did not.
Definitely.
And the conversation around authenticity, in your session, I thought it was particularly important because authenticity and being able to live comfortably, boldly, and unapologetically in your own skin is directly related to our session today. So I thought maybe the first thing to do is, let me move forward to this one slide, is to really talk about what is intersectionality. So would you like to start us off with not the Webster dictionary definition, but what is the term? What does it mean?
Yeah, so the term, as the slide indicates, was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a legal scholar, and her theory around intersectionality had to do with primarily race and gender, especially talking about Black women, right, as it relates to police brutality, discrimination, etc. And so obviously that word has been expanded on.
Yeah. That's a better
So
word.
often,
That's a better word.
yeah, it's been expanded on to talk about more than just race and gender. I think that it's become critical race theory and intersectionality and these buzzwords have become weaponized by the far right conservative movement. And not to get too political, but intersectionality, I like to think of it as a metaphor. It is a way in which we view the existence of multiple people who belong to multiple marginalized identities.
Yeah, that's a good
Right, and
point.
not
And
just identities, right? Like I know we'll talk about this a little bit later as the conversation progresses, but there are many ways that we are intersectional beyond identities, right? And so it depends on the kind of role we play in our families, the kind of the role we fall in the workplace, and all those kind of things kind of play a role in our identities and what shapes that. But for me, as a queer, disabled, gender non-conforming Latinx man, I recognize that I live at the intersection of multiple identities that are sometimes in conflict with each other.
oh, what a good point. And I realized, Vaughn, I broke my very own rule. Before we started, we should have started with the polling question. So let's go ahead and launch that first poll.
Okay, yes, let's go ahead and do that poll number 1. And yes, it's a very perfectly timed poll for what we were just discussing. Is, are you familiar with the term intersectionality? Maybe you are now after that definition.
Yeah, we
But
gave it away. We gave it away before we asked the question.
so yeah, let's say if we hadn't have said anything, first of all, what would you think? So this is our first of four polls that we have for you today. We keep our polls open for about 60 seconds, allow you to get your votes in. I do see those results coming in now. Thank you so much. We have an attentive group today. All right, we've got majority of the audience voted, but we're going to give it another 10 seconds. I want to make sure everyone has that full time available to get that CPE.
And most of us were accountants, and I didn't ask in the polling question, do you know the definition? So at least familiarity, we didn't give it all away, so that's good.
All right, wonderful. All right, we're going to go ahead and close this poll down in 3, 2, and 1. You are, and back to you.
All right. Well, I mean, I'm excited to see that there are people familiar with it, because for those that aren't, I have this cool exercise. I found this, I was doing my own prep. Mark, I don't know if you've done this exercise before. I'd be curious if you did it as well. The suggestion was set a timer for 1 minute and then say, I'm thinking out loud, as many I am statements that you can say in a minute. And I started laughing because I got to 18 and I don't even think it was a minute. So for
Oh,
example, I'll tell you all of mine. I am a woman. I'm a mother. I am a wife. I'm a daughter. I'm a sister. I'm a friend. I'm a pet owner. I'm someone who drives a stick shift. I'm a vegetarian. I'm a sister-in-law. I'm a cousin. I have an invisible disability. I have ADHD. I'm a visual learner. I'm an extrovert. I'm socially awkward. I'm right-handed. I'm a smartass. So that's as far as I got on my list. And I'd be curious, have you ever done something like that? And for our attendees, if you go through that exercise, you're defining all of the identities that you have.
yeah, I've never done that particular exercise, but now I'm curious what I can do in a minute. I know the top 3 or 4 that would come easy to me, but I'm wondering beyond the obvious identities, what else I can put. And so thank you for sharing that activity with me. I'm definitely going to practice that and try to use it in my other sessions that I do.
Sure. And one of the reasons I thought it was really powerful for people to think about is, okay, so some of them were silly. I'm someone who drives a stick shift. I'm a smartass. But what's interesting about that is this speaks to our internal identity, because the way I perceive you, Mark, so if I didn't know anything about your identity, if you didn't tell me you are gender nonconforming as part of your identity, and I know that there are people who do this, rightly or wrongly, I would look at you and potentially immediately make judgments, because I have perceptions of what you should be showing up as if you are male in this society. And if you aren't conforming to those norms, there's something wrong with you. There's not something wrong with me, because I'm seeing things right. And
Mm.
so I just think that people understanding that all of those things make us who we are.
Absolutely. And you're right. I think that, I know you mentioned me winning the Audre Lorde Award for Social Justice, and it was ironic that I received that award because Audre Lorde was the reason why I can define my own manhood. So for those who are not familiar with Audre Lorde, she was an amazing poet, warrior, feminist, a womanist, Black lesbian woman who wrote the book The Cancel Journals and Sister Outsider and so many other books. And I watched a documentary in my Women's and Gender Studies course about called Contemporary Lesbian Issues, where they show us an excerpt of her documentary around her cancer and her life. And she had a son, and she said, I wanted my son to define his own manhood. And something about a mother saying to their child, even though I am queer, even though I am this feminist and this celebrity and well known figure, I want you to define your own manhood. That liberated me that day when I saw that in class. And I have committed myself since watching that documentary to always define myself for myself.
I love that. Define myself for myself. So now everyone knows why I really wanted you to join us today. Hang on a second, everyone. So while I'm going to, I have a note that I want to make sure I go back to. And sorry for me not having that already ready already. But can you speak to us about when you think about your identity? We actually spoke at the beginning. This question comes up a lot. Is there something that is the primary you, like you're primarily what? You have all these,
Yeah,
and you had all these things you describe yourself at, but those are descriptors. But what are you really? That questions, I'm sure, comes up a lot.
yeah, that's a great question. And what I'm about to say is going to sound really cheesy. So just brace yourself, audience, for a cheesy response. At my core, who I am primarily is a human, right? A human made up of so many different identities, of so many different experiences, of laughter and trauma, of resilience and failure, of success and love and loss and grief. That primarily I'm human. And what I realized is that authenticity is my superpower. I said this in my TEDx talk that my professional success would not be possible had I not learned how to embrace myself. The idea that embracing yourself, embracing your potential is the key to your success in your career, both professionally and personally, right, in your life. And so when people ask me, well, are you Latinx first and then disabled, or are you queer first, then Latinx? And I say, I am all of those things at the same time in totality, right? There is no separating my brownness from my queerness or my crippledness or my gender nonconformity. I'm all those things at once. And all of those things make me the human that I am today, right? And so I don't believe in a hierarchy of my identity.
Oh, okay. So two questions. Let me write this one down. So I'll tell you this. So my question that I was thinking about is, but do you lean into any one at any given time more than another? But before I want you to answer that question, you did something really powerful. I don't know if you know this and if others are observed it, but you talked about your brownness and so on, and you said my crippledness.
Mhm.
That is a word that you have owned
Yes.
as part of your identity. And I can tell you that had you not used that word, I would have never used that word because I see disability, but I wouldn't use the word cripple just because it's an antiquated word that isn't a safe word to use anymore. So, how do then I approach your identity if I'm uncomfortable with the very language? Okay. And then my other one about, do you lean into one more than the other? So I've now thrown two questions at you.
Yeah, and those are two very important questions. And so this is what I will say to the first part around crippled. The title of the working title of my memoir, which I'm working on, hopefully I'm trying to get to it this year, but it may have to be early next year, is called Crippled but Not Broken.
Mm-hmm.
Because before I recognized that my race othered me, before I recognized my queerness and my gender nonconformity and the way those things othered me, I was born disabled. And I was born obviously a person of color, and obviously I was born queer, and obviously I was born with this gender expression and this identity around self-expression, right? But before I knew about all those other identities, right, I knew I was different because of my disability. And so you're right, crippled is not a term that other people should call someone. It is definitely a term that can be used intercommunally and also for the person who's choosing to identify that way. There's a group of us, of my friend circle, called Queer Crips, where we're queer disabled people. And the reason why I've come to embrace crippled is because I was raised in a family that, yes, I was the sick kid. My mom gave birth to me at 5.5 months. I weighed 1 pound. This was in 1991, to give you
Wow.
a reference where the medical technology was at that time. The likelihood of me surviving, I think, was around 30% or less.
Mhm.
So the fact that I survived, right? My disability taught me what it meant to be resilient.
Mm,
From the moment I took my first breath, I had to learn what it meant to fight to live my life. And that resiliency, that experience, that entrance into the world would stay with me subconsciously in my bones,
right. So
right?
this naturally gets to the other question then, is there one aspect of your identity that you're
Yeah.
leaning into at any given time, or that is you said earlier that you're all things all the time, but
Uh,
sometimes somebody will look at you as one thing. So people will see me as black before they see me as a woman. At least that's what the data tells us.
mm.
But
Yeah, and
then they
so
see me as a black woman after that. But it's first black, then woman, then black woman. In that order, before we're even aware that we've done it. And so as a result, I'm going to be labeled as something potentially by someone else, which means that's where I'm starting from.
absolutely.
Do you ever
Yeah,
approach somebody with the starting position of your own, is where I guess where I'm going with that.
yeah. So I don't hierarchize my identities, right? And so I don't choose to lean into one over the other. I think there are certain identities, which you mentioned earlier, that are visible. Some are more hyper visible than others, right? So obviously my gender nonconformingness is visible, my race is visible, my disability is not as visible, right? My perceived sexuality is
Mhm.
visible, right? And so I have 3 out of 4 are hyper visible identities, right? And so growing up, no one questioned my disability. Now, after surgery and physical therapy and dance, people question my disability, right? And
Mm.
so, or I guess I shouldn't say question, but they don't recognize it right away. And so, what's interesting is that I've had to learn as my body and my disability has shifted that I am not less disabled now because it's less obvious, right?
That's a really good point, actually. I mean, I'm biracial. Anyone who's watched this series, okay, not so subtle plug, every other Friday at 3 o'clock Eastern, I have another guest. Okay, so anyone who has watched this series, and there are a couple people here today who have been with us, you've heard me say my mother's Filipino and my father is black. Well, when I grew up, being biracial wasn't something you revealed because when my parents got married, it was illegal, which tells you about the view of there were some people who have been ostracized from their family. Think about the royals, for example, because when you marry outside of your race, the children might be not deformed, but some form of not right. And so today, though, people wear it as a badge. People are proud to say they're biracial or multiracial. And so, to your point, that consciousness has stayed with me. And I don't want to say it's tainted my view because that sounds negative, but it has absolutely been a filter through which I view the world and engage in the world. It's part of my identity internally that isn't necessarily something the way other people see me. So there's a disconnect then between the way others see me and the way I see myself. And as a result, the way I might relate to other people. And I think to your point about intersectionality, it's more complicated what I just described because I also have an invisible disability. I mentioned that already in my I am statements. I have all of these things, and I know I'm not any one of these things. So what happens to you? What is the suggestion you have? Just monitoring time. What is a suggestion you might have for somebody who's listening today who has lots of different parts of their identity that don't seem to get seen or recognized?
That your identities are your identities. It's identity, not their identity, right? So it's important to recognize that whether your identities are hyper visible or invisible, you you get to honor all the things and all the elements that make you who you are. You get to claim who you are, you get to be who you are, and you get to make the daily choice to show up authentically as your full self.
So I'm stealing that for the record.
Yeah.
Totally stealing. It's I identity, not you identity. I love that. And so I want to share this picture. Let me find it. It is this picture. I specifically went out on the internet and tried to find the best one.
Yeah, that's a great
You
one.
said something in a previous call, and you wrote, quote, "It allows me to show up at the crosswalk." And I immediately thought of this picture. You were talking about how owning and embracing all the different parts of your identity without trying to isolate one over the other allows you to show up at this point and not feel conflicted about how you then move through that intersection. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's first of all, this visual, can you share with me after this? Because the visual itself is such a compelling visual, and so kudos to you. But yeah, it's such a metaphoric, physical embodiment of what I was just saying, which was the idea that, we're often taught in society, this is what it means to be a man. This is what it means to be a Latino. This is what it means to be straight or queer, right? And or disabled, non-disabled, right? And so we are conditioned often when we cross the street to stay within the crosswalks and often go from one corner to the other, right? And so we are so conditioned to do it for safety reasons, but also because it's a form of conditioning
Assimilation?
around
Conditioning.
assimilation and where you belong, right? And how to dictate how you live your life.
Stay in
And
your
so I
lane.
love about stay in your lane. Yeah, you hear that all the time, right? Stay in your lane. You're a person of color. How dare you speak up in this meeting? You're a woman of color. You're a black woman. How dare you speak up in this meeting? You're a queer person who's visibly queer and trans and a person of color. How dare you speak up in this meeting? Stay in your lane.
Right. And when you talk about how dare you speak up in this meeting, sometimes it is literally nobody asked you to speak. But
Right.
other times, and it can be more subtle, let's say we're trying to solve a challenge um, in a particular space in business. And so the perception is only people who have lived experience in that space should be speaking to it. And so I have part of my identity can absolutely relate to that experience. But if I speak to it, people are like, well, you don't have a stake in the game. So you shouldn't be part of this conversation because your perspective, your ideas, they're not relevant here. So for example, I don't identify as queer. I am not myself part of the LGBTQ community. And we are at the office talking about policies that affect our LGBTQ employees. And so I speak up because unbeknownst to everyone else, and let's just say my brother is gay, or let's say my daughter was born my son. I have firsthand knowledge of what it feels like, not because it's been my identity, but because I have lived with others with that space. So that's an example of don't speak up, stay in your lane. Nobody asked you for your opinion.
And that's a great example because I think as a marginalized person, because of your race and your gender, speaking up because there may not be any openly queer or trans person in that room, right? And
Openly.
so right? And so sometimes it falls on other marginalized people to take an intersectional approach to what equity, diversity, and inclusion means.
That's
It's not just about race, right? That when we talk about building a workplace culture and a community and a society that is just and healthy, it means that all people have a fair shot
yes.
get to the top of wherever their career paths are and to live in a society that will not kill them. The life expectancy for a black and brown trans woman is 35 years old.
Hmm.
A person of color who's gender conforming, who's often perceived as a trans woman, that means that in 4 years, I would most likely be either attacked or killed, right? That my life expectancy is less because of my identities, right? And so we need people like you, right, who are speaking up about inequities, about unfair policies, about the importance of including LGBTQ plus people because you understand the marginalized society we live in, right? And the impact that that has on our well-being, on our productivity, on our innovation, on our creativity. I always tell people I bring my whole self to the table, either virtually or in person, because I am at my best when I am all of who I am.
Now, before I go, so Vaughn, I'm teeing it up now. We're going to do the second polling question, but before we do that, I just want to say one other thing about what you were one of the things that came to me while you were talking just now is that all of that resonates with me, and I have permission to determine what I'm going to lead with at any given time. So I can come to this meeting and I can choose not to lean into my experiences in a particular area. And I don't owe anybody an explanation, and I don't need to make apologies. And so you're talking about I see all of me all the time, but there could be somebody listening who is starting to build some awareness around a part of their identity that they hadn't really thought about in terms of conscious awareness. As that awareness comes forward, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to do anything about it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I think, you know, it's a grieving process, right? And I hate to say it this way, you know, but I often tell, especially young LGBTQ people, that the amount of time it took us to come to our awareness, subconsciously and consciously, and then take action to come out or invite in, our family and friends need that similar amount of time, if not more, to adjust and to really embrace who we truly are. And so I often say that I had to grieve who I thought I was going to be to learn to love who I actually am. My mother had to learn to grieve her only son because he wears dresses and makeups and heels and has beautiful nails with the rainbow to add because it's Pride Month.
and for the
And
record,
so
I don't have beautiful nails. So if we're going there, yeah. Well, I mean, no, I appreciate. And the thing is, you're referencing your identity and talking about gender nonconforming and queer. But I want those who are express their gender consistent with the perceived norms, who aren't queer, to understand that everything that you're talking about is true for all of us. So this isn't an attempt to try to get people to understand LGBTQ identity, queer identity. What we're talking about is the fact that you don't have to hide it and you get to own it. All right, now we have to stop talking. Sorry, Vaughn, because we are going to get in trouble for not doing all 4 polling questions. So let's go ahead and launch that second poll.
great.
Well, I'm so enthralled with the discussion, I didn't even realize it. So, so thank you for keeping me on track as well, there, Jina. So yes, we do have poll 2 up on your screens. So does intersectionality resonate as part of your internal identity? And again, there's no wrong answer. It's just, yes, it's for your CPE, but it's also just to be able to express that. So this is poll 2. We're about 30 seconds in.
And that's why we have prefer not to answer as an option, because not everybody wants to answer these questions, and for a number of reasons, and that's okay. That's perfectly okay. Can you all hear the construction noise that's happening behind the scenes here?
No,
Okay, good.
I don't. I
Good.
think you're good. I think
There's
it's
somebody that's working on something.
no, you're fine. I always wonder if somebody can hear my snoring cat. So that's, but I think that's just the life on the internet. So we're gonna go ahead and close this poll down in 3, 2, and 1. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Back to you.
So when I did the I am, just to the question that we just asked, when I did the I am statements, one of the things I said is I'm a pet owner. And Vaughn, what you just said, I have learned that my dog can't be in my room when we do these sessions because he snores and people can hear the snoring, which is, it's awkward. All right, now I watched a TED Talk. Kimberly Crenshaw has a TED Talk called The Urgency of Intersectionality. I would encourage everyone to listen. And I just want to read something that she said, and then maybe share your thoughts. So she asked a bunch of people whether they could identify some of the names, and she listed off a bunch of names. People recognized them. Then she listed more names, and people didn't recognize them. And the only difference between the names was gender. And so she said, quote, when facts do not fit with the available frames, people have a difficult time incorporating these facts into their way of thinking about a problem. Now, so the example here is if you present as gender nonconforming and it doesn't fit my frame of what a man should look like in society, then as you present yourself to me, I'm going to struggle with accepting you. And so intersectionality then, while it's about your expression, it's also about my understanding and acceptance.
Yeah, and so I think, I think to the point around the framework in which Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw is referring to is the idea, and for those who haven't watched the TED Talk, she reads a list of Black men who have been killed by police, and then reads a different list of names, and the only difference between, as you said, the only difference was that the second list of names were Black women, right?
Right.
And so I want to acknowledge that, because I think, this framework, all right, right, and so I think whether I prescribe to the societal norms around manhood, right? Whether I do that or not, that should never negate basic human dignity and respect, right? Especially in the workplace when there's all these policies and procedures around decorum and professionalism, right? And so what I often tell people is that intersectionality is not necessarily an identity, right? It is a metaphor, it is a framework in which we understand how different people of different backgrounds and different intersections navigate the world, how they get from point A to point B to point C to point D, and that should, the reason why we should learn about intersectionality and use that approach when handling policies and diversity, equity, inclusion work is because we need to recognize that it's larger than the sum of one part.
So I mean, like I said, you have to, everyone, I really encourage you to listen to these TED Talks, because she went on and talked about how when we only see people through one frame, in the context of the women who were killed by police, the Black women who were killed by police, she says that it changes the reporters who talk about them, the policymakers, and what they think about them, and the politicians who are encouraged or not encouraged to speak to them. And so she said, it affects Black people and it affects women. And so for many people, it stands to reason then it covers them both, because it treats it affects women who are Black and Black people who are women. And when she said it that way, it became very clear, and I hope that resonates with those listening, that women who are Black people, when we lead with woman, it means something different than when we say Black people who are women. And we can instantly see there are two different groups. Women is in both of those statements, Black person, both of those statements. But that doesn't mean that whatever we're dealing with, you talked about decorum, you talked about workplace norms, cover both of them in the same way,
Right.
cover a Black woman in the same way.
Right. And also, I think in my opinion, and this might be a little charged to say, but I'm going to say it because I really believe it's true. To me, the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman.
Okay, now just to be fair, we're not
Yes.
talking about this you said it's charged, so I appreciate that.
Charged. And I say that because, and here's why, to bring it back to the point of the intersectionality, right? Is that when we think about the Black Lives Matter movement, which was started by Black queer women, right? And we think about the protest around the death of George Floyd's murder, which was a global reckoning, all right, around the world, right? Then we think about Breonna Taylor, right? And we think about Sandra Bland. And for whatever reason, Black women have not received, both politically, socially, and in the workplace, the same level of action or drive to push policies and to ensure their safety. And I say that not as obviously I'm not a Black woman or a Black man, but I say that because I think it's so important, Dr. Crenshaw's work. Yes, women are going through things, but then you add race to the mix, and the approach, the policies, the laws, the regulations, and the approach to this work around equity drastically is different for women, and then women of color, and then disabled women, and then trans women, and right. And so we have to understand that intersectionality allows us to see all of who someone is, acknowledges the plight of their existence, and recognize the need, right, to embrace people for exactly who they are in totality. And embrace doesn't always mean you have to agree with their views or even like who they are, right? But especially in the workplace, you have to be respectful. You have to be cordial. You have to be not, I don't want to say tolerant because I don't like to be tolerated, I need to be accepted in the workplace for my skill set, for my intellect, for my experience, for my education, and for what I can contribute to the company mission,
Not for
and
your fingernails.
not for my fingernails. Exactly.
So in what you were saying, this is a graphic that I created. There are a lot of graphics that have icebergs, and this is an example of an identity iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
And usually you see them showing them simply above and below the waterline. The assumption is what's below the waterline you can't see. But what I would invite people to look at is you'll notice as you get lower and lower and lower to the bottom of the graph, that the words become lighter and lighter and lighter.
Oh, I didn't notice that until you said that.
The descriptors become lighter and lighter. And if you look up, if there are clouds in the sky, it becomes harder and harder to see above us. So what we see clearly is what's right there in front of us above the water line. But I know that if you look below the water line, unless it's really horrible water, you can still see below it. But when you see below it, you have to actually look. You have to look at the water line and look underneath the water and not just at the water in order to see it. And I share this because what you were just talking about is that all of our identities. I have put stuff up here, but I mean, we could come up with 100 more to put onto this slide. And it's not about what I think are the right identities, but it's recognizing that if all of the descriptors I have here resonate with you or me or anyone listening today, the intersectionality is what you see here. It is all of these things inside of a person's identity. Oh, wait, you have a better slide. Let me show everyone that slide.
Oh,
You
I
have
love your
this slide that shows, so the iceberg shows things that people can and can't see. And some you
right.
can see more clearly, and some you may never know, the stuff all the way at the bottom, right? But
Yeah,
what your slide here shows is there's a little spot right in the middle where all of them intersect. And then any combination of them intersect in other spaces. Why
yeah,
was this a visual that you really wanted to make sure we shared?
yeah. Great question. And I believe I wasn't good at math. I'm still not good at math. I believe this is like a version of a Venn diagram, right? And so there are two circles typically in a Venn diagram, and then there's the two
Intersection.
different things, and then in the center there's a intersection, or no pun intended with that word, but there's a point where the two areas connect in some way. And so the reason why I love this graphic, besides the color, purple and blue are some of my favorite colors, the reason why I chose this particular graphic was because I wanted to show people that some of the circles are darker than others, some are a little bit lighter, right? But it doesn't change the fact that they're all intersecting. And the words around this circle, or these various circles, is sexual orientation, age, disability, belief, gender, cognition, nationality, socioeconomic status, race, politics, right? And so these are just some of the key identifiers that we have in our society, right? And some are visible and some may not be visible, but the idea, whether they're seen or not, they all intersect.
Right.
And so I think what happens sometimes is that people, often to be honest, I get like, why don't you just transition? Why don't you just become a woman? And I said, well, because that's not who I am. But they're like, I don't get this gender nonconformingness. And I said, that's okay. I can try to explain it to you. But I think, what I want you to understand is that people come in many shades and we come from many backgrounds. And at the end of the day, I was often told, especially when I first, after college, take off your nails for job interviews. And
Mm-hmm. People hear that a lot.
Yeah, I never did that because I said to myself, one, they're too expensive to take them on and off. And there's no
Okay,
guarantee
that's
I'm
the
going.
practicality of it.
Yeah, the practicality. I grew up really poor, so the practicality, they're expensive, and
Mhm.
also there's no guarantee that taking them off is going to actually get me the job, right? And so what I've learned though is that, and I used to wear suit and ties for my job interviews. I have not done that in years, and the reason why I stopped doing that was because that wasn't who I really was, and I wanted to make sure that whatever company I worked for, that they were going to not just look at me for my qualifications and my talents, but also look at me as a whole human being, and how that experience as a Latinx, disabled, queer, gender nonconforming person is going to help advance their bottom line. Because
Absolutely.
there's data that shows that a more diverse workplace leads to more innovation, increased creativity, and improved return on investment. And so it's not just the right thing to do, it's also there's a business case for this, right? So yes, it's the
Yes.
morally right thing to do, and then there's the business case for those who like data and numbers. I know I'm talking to a bunch of people in this finance field and stuff like that. So there's data and numbers that show that a more diverse workplace is better for business.
But I will caveat that.
Yes.
Diversity without inclusion will not result in bottom line results. I
Well,
use result
that's a
twice.
good point.
Sorry, I apologize for that. But the data tells us that the performance increases when people feel included. That
Yes.
dollar values that organizations start to see, the bottom line improvement, which is usually around reduction in expenses, although to your point about innovation, it also has to do with increased sales because they've either modified a product, entered a new market with an existing product, created a new product, all because people in the organization brought different perspectives and skills and opportunities. So it could be increases in revenue. It could be decreases in expenses, reduced turnover. Reduced. One of the favorite ones I have is that when people feel a sense of belonging, they take 75% fewer sick days.
Mm. Yeah. And
And
you know, I
that is
think
there's a dollar result there.
yes. And I was gonna just say, I was just about to say, I think we talked about this before in a previous conversation. For me, I think of diversity as, diversity is okay, I'm seen, right? I'm seen. Inclusion is I'm heard,
Yes.
right? And then belonging to me is I am accepted and embraced for exactly who I am, right? So diversity is being seen. Oh, he's a person of color, he's disabled, he's queer, he's all these things, right? Inclusion is being heard and being asked to engage and give input and things like that. And then belonging for me is being embraced, not just for my identities, but for what I contribute to the company culture and the workplace. And so for me, belonging, to your point, it is essential. And authenticity is I said this in my DEI summit talk, that authenticity is essential to true belonging. Because how can we ever cultivate true belonging in the workplace or in our lives if people are not really knowing us for exactly who we really are, right?
Or if I'm
If they're
holding back.
learning, if you're holding back, right, exactly. If you're hiding or suppressing, right, then you can never truly belong because at work you're this way and at home you're this way, and sometimes you're overwhelmed with anxiety around, are they gonna find out? Am I gonna be exposed? Am I gonna be outed, right? That you're so afraid that you can't perform well under those kind of conditions, right? That's just not possible. And so for me, I've learned that the best workplaces I've worked at have been places that have showed me through action and policy that my authenticity is not just embraced and wanted, but appreciated.
And I think what's important here is, so we've been talking about a lot of different words, and it sounds like we're not always talking about intersectionality. But the
Hmm.
reason that this is about intersectionality is the reality of the nuanced and complexity of humans. None of us are any one thing. None of us are a reflection of whatever the group we're in terms of stereotypes. One of the things I think in the last two sessions, I've used the word code switching, and I talked about assimilation. And I can't tell you, and I heard all of you, especially if you're listening again, I'm going to make sure that that's included in the future session, because the way I might cover up a part of me has everything to do with me adapting to who else is in the room. And so you might embrace all of the identities that make up who you are. When I said earlier, or when I asked earlier, do you lean into any one? What that could also be is I hide some. It's not that
Mm,
I'm leaning into some, I hide some. Now, I want to get to the practicalities of this when we talk about D&I strategy. You
yeah.
talked about HR and policy and practice, and I wrote down an example here. I got this from, I was in some of my prep for today, that many human resource approaches, policy, practice, systems, norms, and so on, they focus on one group or a specific type of discrimination or a particular barrier, but people aren't one dimensional. And so Kimberly Crenshaw, actually, she said it's not as simple as adding up the barriers. So you can't say, I have 5 different dimensions. 3 of them, there are barriers or discriminations or omissions of policy. So if you address those 3, you've solved things for me. And so the examples that I wanted to share are leave policies. Parents who are gay, a gay employee who is a parent, are they both protected here? Because if your policy says you have to be a birth parent, and you have an employee who is a parent who is gay, they might be a birth parent. A gay employee who is a parent, the gay employee might not even qualify for the benefits because they're only eligible for men and women as defined. So social event, leaders who are women and women who are leaders, that might determine where do they have the social outing. Is it at a cigar bar? Because rarely do we have group manicures, to your nails point, because men can get manicures too. And then the other one I had in this example was leadership training. This is an HR policy. What about managers who are non-binary and non-binary employees who are managers? Will that determine whether we hold the leadership training in, say, Utah, where it's not a question of tolerance, it's a question of awareness and understanding, versus New York City, where you just blend right in? And for organizations, it's important to understand that you have to look at your employees as a collective of identities, because you can't address one and think everyone that's in that group has been addressed, because another aspect of their identity can create complexities and nuances that organizations don't think about in their D&I strategy and their HR policy, because they're so focused on women. So even the Pride Parade, it's Pride Month, right? Even the Pride Parade might be, did you think about your employees with disabilities or your employees with kids? And it's not that kids can't come to the Pride Parade, but what if the after event after the Pride Parade is at a bar? Did you think about your employees with parents? Or if you decided that your meetup place is at this particular plaza and it's not wheelchair friendly? Did you think about that? And so you think you're being inclusive because you're encouraging your organization to participate in the Pride Parade. You are marching in the Pride Parade as a company, but you've just excluded some employees inadvertently.
Yes. So you said a lot there, and I have a couple points. And I think one of the things, and to your point around, by trying to be equitable in one area, you are sometimes causing friction in other areas, right? And I think the best example you shared with me so far is the one about pride. And I'm sharing that because I think that's a very concrete example for people. So yes, there are queer and trans people who are disabled who use wheelchairs and other mobility devices. And you're doing a pride parade at this in this city, imaginary place that we're making up, and you're telling people to meet at a meeting point that's not wheelchair accessible, right? And so while you are thinking that you're embracing and uplifting LGBTQ plus employees, you're not uplifting all of them, because the one who uses a wheelchair can't be included in the Pride celebration because the space is not accessible, right? And so I think that's really important to think about, right? And also the idea around parental leave, for me, one, I don't think birth terminology like birth parent is helpful, because there are so many parents who either adopt, right, and so they physically didn't birth, but they still need parental leave, right? And also this gendered idea around only women get maternity leave, and it's not really good in this country at all. But like the idea that fathers or same gender couples both don't need parental leave, that's not true, right? And so we need to call it parental leave, and say that whether you adopted, whether you foster, whether you gave birth or use a surrogate, you are permitted under our company policy to use parental leave for X amount of time, for X, paid, et cetera, et cetera, because that's the right thing to do. But what you want to do is you want to be able to retain that talented employee, especially if they're a talented employee, right? You want to be able to retain them. And I bet you that when they come back from the parental leave, there's going to be a deeper fire for them to give back and work even harder, because they have been supported to take the time they needed initially to be with their child.
Yeah, and it even might be today caregiver leave, or even better, just leave.
Right.
So
right.
I want to
Leave, family leave, whatever the leaves are, right? And I think there's an obsession, especially with corporate America, with he, she. And as you mentioned, there are some people who are, there's more visibility around trans identities and non-binary identities and agender identities. And I just want to acknowledge that, just people really get hung up on language, and it's always evolving, and
Right.
that's fair. But I really want to encourage people to think about how at our core we all need to work, right? We all need a job to survive, right? We live in a capitalist society, and so just give people the opportunity to make a living and have good work-life balance and feel comfortable in the workplace, and let them do what they have to do, and then let them be who they truly are. And they should have a full life, and they shouldn't have to suppress their life in the workplace.
Now, before I tee up the third polling question, because wow, we are late on polling questions, and everyone I know, there's a fourth one right toward the end, but for the third polling question, this is why training on intersectionality is so important, because without understanding it, you can't review your policies and practices. So, Vaughn, the polling question, if we can go ahead and launch it, has to do with whether or not people have these types of, if intersectionality is part of their training.
That is perfect timing on this poll question. So after that fantastic conversation, so yes, poll 3, has your organization included intersectionality in D&I training programs? Got about 40 more seconds.
Yeah, I wanted to ask this question because so often D&I training is very narrow. And some of the subtleties, intersectionality, for example, can be woven into a number of different training programs. It can be about equity. It can be about cultural awareness. It can be about understanding identities. It can be about leading diverse teams. It could be about unconscious bias. The concept is important to understand because, Mark, you said something very powerful. I don't have to agree with you, but I have to acknowledge you because nobody wants to be invisible. Nobody wants to be dismissed, and nobody wants to be ignored. So
Mhm.
I'm trying to look at the timing because maybe you can. How much more time on the poll, Vaughn?
We're going to go ahead and close this poll down now since we're over our 60 seconds. So that is closed. Looks like we've got about another 5 to 6 minutes on this.
So I put us on the Q&A slide, although I'm looking at the questions and we've sort of knocked them out in our natural conversation. But one of the questions has to do with how we show up at work. So you talked about authenticity and you talked about all of your identities. Does this change you? So you do the interview and you go to work. Does it change how you then show up at work?
Yeah. I remember when I got my first job out of college, I wore the suit and tie for the interview at John Jay. And I remember during the interview process telling my supervisor, hey, by the way, I'm gender conforming, and this is what that means. And she said, well, I don't really know what that is. And this is, again, to be fair, this was like 2015, where the trans visibility wasn't as much as it is today. And she said, but as long as you follow the I guess there was no CUNY doesn't have a dress code policy actually, but she was like, as long as your attire, whatever gender it is, as long as your attire is appropriate for our work office, that's fine with me. And so I remember the next day I wore a dress and heels, and no one questioned it, no one batted an eye. And what she
That's
said to
so
me was,
powerful. Yeah.
yes, and what she said to me my first day on the job was, I don't believe people can do their best work when they can't be their authentic self. And so that freed me to show up the next day in my full femme glory, right? And my work product didn't suffer because of it, right?
That is so powerful. I had the exact opposite experience, by the way. I showed up in
Mm,
pants at a CPA firm and was told women don't wear pants.
mm,
And this was in the late 80s. Now that eventually no longer changed, but there was clearly an expectations of compliance with perceived norms. And in that case, it was the fear wasn't because of the colleagues. It was because
no,
they were afraid of what the clients are going to say.
yeah.
So
Mm,
I'm just throwing that out there because not everybody listening is from in public accounting, but those who are in service-based industries where you are working with clients, this is all the more important why understanding diversity isn't just about the ecosystem inside of your company, but it's about how your company shows up to your customers and your clients.
right.
So before we wrap up, I just want to give you an opportunity. Is there a final thought you want to share before we go to our last polling question?
Yeah, first again, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for welcoming me to your community, into your space. I never take it for granted when someone asks me to share space with me. I always say time is the one currency you can't get back. So thank you for spending some of your time with me, for all the attendees for spending time with us today. you know, this concept, intersectionality, can be a little overwhelming when you start to learn about these concepts, and DEI can be really overwhelming when you start thinking about these concepts. But I always tell people learning and unlearning is a lifelong commitment. And I hope that I continue to become the kind of person I hope others can become, which is someone who's willing to learn, to lean into the discomfort, to grow, to change, to evolve.
Yeah.
So that when I get to the end of my life, I can say, I have been who I've meant to be.
Yeah. Myself, unapologetically. You said something earlier, and this will be my last thought. You talked about experiences and how they change us. We learn from those experiences. We change from those experiences. We see things differently from those experiences. And that ultimately speaks to our own identities. And so that's what's really powerful. So thank you. I'm so grateful I was able to have you with us today, and we were able to make it work. I do want to invite everybody. I gave a shameless plug earlier that these webinars are every other Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Our next guest hasn't been locked down, but if we can get him, he's going to be joining us to talk about some of the challenges specifically around race in the accounting industry, and how it affects us in terms of attracting students into the pipeline, and then what it looks like in practice in the industry. So please join us. It's July 8th at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 weeks. And in the meantime, all right, everybody, we're doing that last polling question, Vaughn.
All right, yes, I have that up on your screens now. And while this fourth and final poll is up, I'll just go ahead and close us out. That was wonderful. I just love being on your webinars, Jina, and all of your wonderful guests. So thank you so much for all of that, and just appreciate both of your time and your expertise and just sharing all of that wonderfulness with us. So, and of course, we will go ahead and process that CPE credit, get that into your accounts in about 24 hours. You'll see that in there. You'll have a recording of this session. You'll have the handouts in that CPA Academy account. So go ahead and check that out. And of course, make sure you jump on over to your inbox, because we do have an evaluation waiting for you there. We definitely welcome and appreciate your feedback. And you can always find the evaluations for any of our sessions in your CPA Academy account as well. So I'm going to give this poll about another 5 seconds. And yep, let's go ahead and close this poll down in 3, 2, and 1. All right, wonderful. So again, yes, thank you so much for all of that, and thank you for being with us. I'm just going to keep saying thank you until I just said to my closing line of check out our schedule on cpaacademy.org, because I hope to see you all on future webinars. But for now, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. All right, bye everyone.